Hi, this is Matt at LSAT Lab, and today's lesson is on parallel flaw questions in the logical reasoning section. Only 4% of logical reasoning questions are parallel flaw questions, so they're not the most important question type out there, but you will see a couple of these every test. In today's lesson, we're going to cover how to spot a parallel flaw question, what the process is for approaching one, how you can use structure and validity to anticipate what you're looking for, and what are the trap answer patterns you need to be aware of so that you can get rid of those last remaining wrong answer choices. In this question stem, we get which one of the following exhibits flawed reasoning most similar to that exhibited by the argument above. So in this question, the key language here is flawed reasoning most similar. So we're looking for an argument that contains flawed reasoning that is similar to the flawed reasoning in the argument above. So that tells us that we're looking at a parallel flaw question. Here's another one. The flawed pattern of reasoning in which one of the following arguments most closely resembles the flawed pattern of reasoning in the argument above. Again, we're looking at a flawed pattern of reasoning, and we're looking for it to most closely resemble the reasoning above. In this question stem, we get the questionable pattern of reasoning in which one of the following arguments is most similar to that in the argument above. So we're getting questionable reasoning, most similar to, that tells us that we're looking at a parallel flaw question. So the process that we want to take when working on parallel flaw questions is similar to that what we're going to use when we're working on parallel questions. We're going to first find the conclusion, find the evidence for why it's true, evaluate the reasoning, so judge it, figure out whether it's good or bad and how it's organized. Use that to anticipate what an answer could sound like, and then use trap answer patterns to navigate the answer choices. The comparative reasoning structure will play a major role on parallel flaw questions. It plays a much stronger role on parallel flaw questions than on parallel questions. It's not the most important reasoning structure on parallel flaw questions, but comparison does play a significant role on a very large number of questions. Let's look at an example. Go ahead and give this one a try. Hit pause, try this question on your own, and when you think you've got the right answer, hit play again, and we'll work it through together. All right, welcome back. Let's start by looking at the argument in the stimulus. We're told that all Labrador retrievers bark a great deal. So Labrador retrievers are barking a lot. And then we're told that all St. Bernards bark infrequently. So they don't bark very much at all. We know that each of Rose's dogs is a cross between a Labrador Retriever and a St. Bernard. Then we get the conclusion with the word therefore. Rose's dogs are moderate barkers. So we know that Rose's dogs are moderate barkers. So what we're looking for is an answer choice that says that if you take these two things that lie on opposite sides of the spectrum and you blend them together, what you're going to get is something that is somewhere halfway between them. So now that we've got an idea of what we're looking for, let's go into the answer choices and see what we get. Answer choice A says that all students who study diligently make good grades. So if you study diligently, you have good grades. But some students who do not study diligently also make good grades. Well, notice there's not two ends of a spectrum here. So this doesn't look like it's heading down the right path. We wanted to see the opposite outcome for these two groups. And instead we're given the same outcome for both groups, that they both get good grades. Because parallel flaw questions take more time because you have to evaluate 6 arguments, this might be a good place where you identify a point where an answer choice is wrong, and rather than pushing through and reading the rest of it, you make the decision that, hey, this is wrong, and I'm going to move on. So for the sake of this example, let's keep going. We know that Jane studies somewhat diligently, and then we get the conclusion, therefore, Jane makes somewhat good grades. So the conclusion is that someone who is somewhat diligent makes somewhat good grades. Right? So the outcome is not perfect. It's not terrible. The second premise isn't giving us the opposite outcome, and so we've got a wrong premise. And so we can get rid of answer choice A and look at answer choice B. All type A chemicals are extremely toxic to human beings. So we know that these are type A chemicals are extremely toxic. And then we know that all type B chemicals are non-toxic to human beings. So we've got type B and they're not toxic. We also know that this household cleaner is a mixture of a type A chemical and a type B chemical. Therefore, here's the conclusion, this household cleaner is moderately toxic. So we have a mixture between the two, and we get an outcome that's somewhere in between. This one looks really good. Let's hold on to answer choice B and see what else they give us. Now let's look at answer choice C. It says that all students at Hanson School live in Greene County. So we can see that as a rule. If you go to Hanson School, you live in Greene County. And then we have another premise that says that all students at Edwards School live in Wynn County. So we have another rule, building a relationship between going to Edward School and living in Wynn County. Then we get another premise that says that members of the Perry family attend both Hanson and Edwards. So we know that there are members of that family going to both. Then we get a conclusion, therefore, some members of the Perry family live in Greene County and some live in Wynn County. Now we have these two rules. We know that the triggers of those rules have been met. The argument goes on to conclude, therefore, that the outcome of those rules is also true. And this is actually a valid argument. We're not trying to find a middle point between two extremes. This one is simply giving us some rules and applying them. So this one is a valid argument, which means it doesn't parallel the flaw. It's got the wrong validity, and validity is a really important check. We can use structure to get rid of a lot of wrong answer choices. When we see a relationship in the premises that we can match in the answer choices, or in the conclusion that we can match in the answer choices. So that structure is really important, but so is validity. And if you see an argument that's a valid argument, when you're on a parallel flaw question, get rid of it. Answer choice D says that all transcriptionists know shorthand. Right? So here we have transcriptionists know shorthand. And then we have all engineers know calculus. So we know all engineers know calculus. Bob has worked both as a transcriptionist and as an engineer. So Bob has both of those qualities that trigger the rule. Then we get the conclusion, therefore, followed by the claim that Bob knows both shorthand and calculus, which is the outcome of the original rules. So again, we have actually the same situation in D as we did in C. We have a couple of rules. We meet the triggers of those rules. They go on to conclude the outcome of those rules. This is a perfectly valid argument, meaning it has the wrong validity and we can get rid of it. Answer choice E says that all of Kenesha's dresses are very well made. So here we got another rule. If it's made by Kenesha, it's well made. And we have another rule that says all of Connie's dresses are very badly made. Okay, so now we've got Connie's are badly made. Now here we do have different outcomes. So this is heading in the right direction. Half of the dresses in the closet are very well made, and half of them are very badly made. So half well made, half badly made. Goes on to give us a conclusion that half of the dresses in this closet are Kenesha's and half of them are Connie's. Now, this is simply taking the outcome of the rules and working backwards across the relationship. So while this isn't a good argument, it mistakes a necessary for sufficient condition. It commits the wrong flaw compared to the one in the stimulus. So one of the reasons why we can get rid of answer choices on parallel flaw questions is even though they're flawed, they contain a different type of flaw than that which we're trying to parallel. Since we can get rid of answer choice E, that leaves us with a B as the right answer. Now let's take a look at another example, but one that uses conditional logic, which is still the dominant reasoning structure on parallel flaw questions. Try this question on your own, hit pause, and when you think you've got the right answer, hit play again, and we'll review it together. All right, welcome back. So let's start by looking at the argument of the stimulus. Here we're given that paleomycologists, scientists who study ancient forms of fungi, and very few of us probably knew who paleomycologists were before we looked at this question, are invariably acquainted with the scholarly publications of all other paleomycologists. Right? It's a small field, so everybody knows everybody else's work. Right? But here we get the word invariably. Right? Invariably is telling us that there's a relationship here. That if you're a paleomycologist, then you are acquainted with those publications. So we can express that as an if-then relationship. And then we're told that Professor Mansour is acquainted with the scholarly publications of Professor DeAngelis, who is a paleomycologist. Now, I can oversimplify that a little bit and say, hey, this person, Professor Mansour, is acquainted with the publications. They go on to give us a conclusion, therefore, Professor Mansour must also be a paleomycologist, right? So they're giving us the trigger from that original rule. This argument is flawed in that it mistakes a necessary for sufficient condition. It reverses the direction of the conditional relationship. So in the answer choices, we'll be looking for another argument that commits the same flaw, mistaking a sufficient and necessary condition. Here's answer choice A. When a flight on Global Airlines is delayed, all connecting Global Airlines flights are also delayed. And here we have the word when, which builds a rule. So when the Global Airlines flight is delayed, then all connecting Global Airlines flights are also delayed. So if the original flight is delayed, then the connecting flights are delayed. And then we're told that since is giving us an organizational language cue. It's actually prompting us that the conclusion's coming up. First, we're going to get a premise, and then after the comma, we'll have the conclusion. So we have a conclusion coming up. Since Frida's connecting flight on Global was delayed, so we know that the connecting flight was delayed, the conclusion here is that her original flight must have been delayed. This is looking like a very good answer choice. It's reversing the direction of the relationship. Let's hold on to answer choice A because it's also mistaking a necessary for sufficient condition. Looks pretty good. Answer choice B says that any time that one of Global Airlines' local ticket agents misses a shift, the other agents on that shift need to work harder than usual. So we have any time that one misses a shift, the others have to work harder. That gives us a if-then relationship between one person missing a shift and the others working harder. Then we're told since. So here's our conclusion indicator. It's introducing evidence, but after the comma will be the conclusion. Since none of Global's local ticket agents missed a shift, so we know that nobody missed a shift, the conclusion goes on to say that the airline's ticket agents did not have to work harder than usual last week. So the conclusion is that they didn't work harder. Here, it's not exactly mistaking a sufficient for necessary condition. It's more like it's negating the sufficient condition and then concluding the negation of the necessary. So while we're looking for reversed logic, answer choice B has negated logic, which is simply a different flaw, and we can get rid of it. Answer choice C says that anytime the price of fuel decreases, Global Airlines expenses decrease and its income is unaffected. So we have that anytime, that trigger, we have that word any, which gives us a relationship. It tells us that when the price of fuel decreases, then we have expenses decrease and its income is unaffected. Right? So price of fuel goes down, expenses goes down, and income is flat. The next statement is that the price of fuel decreased several times last year, so we know the price of fuel going down. And then we have the conclusion, therefore, Global Airlines must have made a profit last year. So having made a profit is the conclusion here. Now, making a profit is not anywhere in the evidence. This conclusion is out of left field. So this has simply got the wrong conclusion. Right? That's one of the reasons why you can get rid of answer choices. Sometimes you'll identify a difference either in the conclusion or in one of the premises that you can use to say that this is different than what was going on in the stimulus. This conclusion is simply not related to the evidence that was presented. Answer choice D. All employees of Global Airlines can participate in its retirement plan after they have been with the company for a year or more. Now, the key word here is the word can. They can participate after they have been with the company a year or more. So if somebody's been there for a year or longer, they can participate. And then we're told that Gavin has been with the Global Airlines for 3 years. Well, let's call that 1 or more years. Like that's more than enough to trigger the rule. We can therefore be sure, so we have a conclusion here, that he participates in Global's retirement plan. So the conclusion is that he's definitely participating. We can be sure of that. But that's a really strong conclusion given the evidence, which was that if somebody has been working there for 1 or more years, then they can participate. So the conclusion in this answer choice is simply too strong. This has got a different flaw from the one committed in the stimulus. The conclusion simply goes beyond what can be established. It's close, but just simply too strong. Finally, let's look at answer choice E. Whenever a competitor of Global Airlines reduces its fares, Global must follow suit or lose passengers. So we have a rule. Whenever the competitor reduces its fares, Global must follow suit, which means that they must reduce their fares, or they're going to lose passengers. So if the competitor reduces their fares, then either Global is going to reduce their fares as well, or they're going to lose passengers. Now, we know that Global carried more passengers last year than it did the year before, so it's not like they lost passengers last year. Then we get the conclusion, therefore, Global must have reduced its fares last year. So reducing fares is the conclusion, but there's information tucked into that conclusion that's super important. It's telling us that last year, the competitors did reduce their fares. So this other piece of information tucked into the conclusion that tells us that the rule is applicable, that the competitor did reduce their fares, which means that now we have to apply the rule. And since they didn't lose passengers last year, it must be true that they reduced their fares. So answer choice E is a valid argument, which means it doesn't match the validity of the argument in the stimulus. It's got the wrong validity. A valid argument is not going to match a flawed argument. So we can get rid of answer choice E, and that leaves us with A as the correct answer. While we were looking at those examples, several reasons kept appearing for why answer choices were wrong, and they relate to scope and logic. 33% of answers are wrong on parallel flaw questions simply because they have a mismatched premise or the wrong premise. 42% of answer choices are wrong because they have the wrong conclusion. So it's really important to focus on that conclusion. That's where a lot of the mistakes are made within these arguments. 33% of answers are wrong because they have the wrong validity, meaning the argument in the answer choice is a valid one, whereas what we're trying to parallel is a flawed argument. 33% of answers are wrong on parallel flaw questions because they have the wrong flaw. If we can pre-phrase what the flaw is in the argument, then when we see a different flaw committed in answer choices, we can get rid of it. Finally, 8% of wrong answers are wrong because they have the wrong reasoning. You're looking at a comparison, and the answer choice is dealing with conditional logic, or vice versa. So if you see a mismatch between the reasoning in the stimulus and that in the answer choice, get rid of it. In summary, you spot a parallel flaw question with language in the question stem that tells you that you're looking for something that is most similar to the flawed reasoning, or most parallels the erroneous reasoning, or most closely resembles the flawed argument. The reasoning structures that you want to be on the lookout for on parallel flaw questions, 55% of these questions are built with conditional logic, 43% of them are built with comparative reasoning, and 10% of them are built with causal reasoning. The trap answers we want to be on the lookout for are wrong conclusion, wrong premise, having the wrong validity, having the wrong flaw, or has a different type of reasoning. So that's it for today's lesson on parallel flaw questions. I invite you to check out these other lessons or visit us today at lsatlab.com.